Good afternoon. My name is Stuart Reenoff. I'm with Cushman & Wakefield, and we are the leasing agents for 300 West Pratt Street. And we are thrilled to introduce Ayeshah Abuelhiga, who is the CEO of Mason Dixie Foods, and she's has her headquarters located here in the building. And she's got a terrific story, and she's a real advocate for the city of Baltimore, and we're proud to have her here in our building.
I'm Edward Warfield. I'm the publisher of City Biz. I'm honored today to interview Ayeshah Abuelhiga from Mason Dixie Foods. Welcome.
Thank you.
Prior to founding Mason Dixie Foods in 2014, your career included stints with Audi and Latest. Can you tell us a little bit about your career and the decision to start Mason Dixie Foods?
Yeah, so, very common immigrant child story. My parents wanted me to be the first to go to college. And so I did. I did the good thing that they always want you to do. And, of course, they wished I was going to be a doctor or a lawyer, but didn't really sit well with me. So I ended up going into business very early on, launching my career in consumer tech and automotive. And obviously very male-dominated industries. So it was really hard for me to get the promotions that I deserved and wanted. And thus I started getting really frustrated with the glass floor in both those industries. And I decided after 15 years that I didn't want to wait for a C-suite position to open up in marketing and HR, because that's what these male-dominant industries put you in as a lady. So I decided that it was time for me to take the leap and make my own way and start my own company. For me, the inspiration behind going back to food was, I grew up with it. My parents owned a small convenience store in Baltimore that also served some hot food. And, I remember growing up just seeing all people from all walks of life enjoying Southern comfort food made from scratch. And as an adult, when I went to college, for example, then many of a hungover morning, looking for those comforts that I loved. And it was embarrassing because most of the places were either, big franchises, KFC, Chick-fil-A's, or just really not good Southern food because it came out of a bag or a can or had monstrous sized chicken breasts. I mean, just not, what I was used to. So I really thought it was time to make a change. And kind of thinking back to, what I wanted to do and how I might be able to set my own path. Obviously, it was in food. I put myself through college working restaurant jobs, and I thought there was a lot of opportunity there. And that's kind of the start of how Mason Dixie was born.
So in 2014, you launched your brand on Kickstarter. Can you tell us about that campaign and the results of your Kickstarter program?
Yeah, so obviously as a girl leaving a high-tech automotive company, right, I wasn't a celebrity chef, and this was back in the days where Top Chef was like the latest thing. Everybody thought they were a chef. So without that accolade, it was going to be hard to launch, and I knew that right away. So I decided to try to find a platform that could tell our story to as many people as possible and give me an understanding of whether or not there would be market traction. Because my goal was, not to stop at one small restaurant. I wanted 100, I wanted 1,000, and to do that, that means I've got to be able to sell biscuits in San Francisco as well. So, we were only the second food concept, I think, to really get onto Kickstarter at the time. It was still kind of that, 1-800-MY-IDEA type place where people had really cool inventions. But food was still very new as a crowd-funded thing. So, we posted the campaign in July of 2014, just again, because I wanted to see how it would do. I think it was for $25,000 or something like that. We ended up getting over 27,000. So it was successful in getting capital. But again, it wasn't about the capital, right? It was really about, can we prove that the country wants this? And I think one of the most amazing things I got out of it was really an understanding of who our customer was. I mean, every single person that gave me from $1 to $1,000, they accompanied it with a private message that had some amazing story or an amazing photograph that, I have somebody's great grandfather from the Civil War. I've got his photo in my email. I've got recipes for people's favorite jams. I've got everything because that's what this food is. It is everything. It's everything that you grew up on. It's everything that you remember, everything that you love. So it really made me think about how we positioned ourselves from the start, that it wasn't just about, the best clean comfort food. It was about, how do you sell home? How do you sell happiness, right? How do you do that right and do the justice to these customers who have these stories and nostalgic moments that they want to share with the world?
And so at the end of, during 2014, you also launched a pop-up store at Union Market. Can you tell us about that and how many square feet was that?
It was 80 square feet, barely. There was a column in it. So less than that. We got started there only because there was a surge in demand, right? After the Kickstarter campaign, everybody wanted to try it. And I was like, well, I don't really have a good way to do that. That's the whole point of the Kickstarter, was to create a proof of concept and then launch the thing into a fundraising round. But they didn't really give me the time. I mean, once that thing was out there, people wanted to taste it. So I called up this local gelato factory that was kind of in an up-and-coming neighborhood near Union Market at the time. And they had this really cool coffee shop thing in the front, but there wasn't a lot of people coming into that neighborhood yet. So I thought, hey, why don't I serve breakfast? You guys serve coffee and gelato. We'll both make money. It'll be a great little collaboration, and some foot traffic will come our way. And it was, hours of lines wrapped around the block. I had to call all my bartender friends that were just coming in from a shift to go to Costco and grab more flour. I mean, it was chaos, but it was great because, the Washington Post showed up and they did this whole report out on that day. So we were forced to do another day. And on the second day, the developers from Union Market came by and said, hey, we have a spot for you. Ironically enough, I had already applied for a spot and they declined my application. But, of course, since the Washington Post wrote about it, I got a spot. Stuart, you got to tell these people, stop doing this stuff. Can't judge people before you know them. So, I got, this amazing, probably 70 plus odd feet, pop-up space. It had a hand sink and an outlet. That's it. So we couldn't really produce out of there. So we ended up producing out of a commercial kitchen about a mile away, bringing the food in daily, keeping it on warmers and toasters and all that. So it could really only hold so much food on a regular basis. So we would sell out, honestly, by 12 o'clock most weekends.
So in 2015, you had a pretty significant new catalyst in the form of Whole Foods. You had a regional marketing director who was secret shopping your products. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so in that tiny space at Union Market, we had not too long in, I want to say maybe a couple months in, we had a really busy Sunday. And, I will tell you though, and this is something for, the real estate development world, this is an important thing to understand. When you have community and grassroots driven brands, they draw traffic and create organic spaces. So when we went into Union Market, we were one of only 2 spots really open before 11 a.m. It was us and the coffee spot. But because we got traffic coming in there, all of a sudden the vegetable guy started opening up at 9. And then the flower guy opened up at 9. And then everybody started opening up. And it created a really thriving community for people to see Union Market as a point of interest, not just as a grocery shop or restaurant place. So, this is what can happen by the power of people, right? So good. That's the good side. The bad side is you run out of food at 10 a.m. on a Sunday. So we ran out of food, and I had some disgruntled customers stop by and say, hey, why don't you just sell me the dough? I'll just make it myself at home. And then I had some really, loyal customers say, we've never had your food fresh out of the oven because we know that it has to come from Union Kitchen down the street. So it'd be really nice to get some dough that I could just make at home, or if you could sell me the biscuits that are part baked. Their brains were going off. And I listened to them and I said, you know what, that's not a bad idea. So I went back to against the pastry chef's volitions. I took some pucks when he was making them and I put them on a freezer tray secretly and I put them in the freezer. And the next day I baked them off and they rose gorgeously. So I knew they could stand up to being frozen. And then I went to where every dream is made, Bed Bath & Beyond, and I bought a $100 food saver machine, and I started vacuum sealing these bags. And again, 70 plus square feet, right? There was no outlet for a freezer. So I took a big boat cooler, filled it with ice, and then put as many biscuits as I could in there. This thing was heavy as hell, right? So dragged it into the market, and, it was a hit. We were selling out of the frozen biscuits before we sold out of hot food. And that's where a couple months in, we'd gotten this woman that came and she wiped us out of frozen biscuits and nobody knew who she was. come to find out 3 months later, it was the regional marketing manager for Whole Foods. And she said, my son ate all these biscuits. He absolutely loved them. I have to have them at Whole Foods. And that's when I was like, okay, not part of the plan, right? And ended up trying to think through a strategy. So I dropped off these samples to her and I said, if you give me some time, I'll figure out how to do this right. Just did some research. I mean, there was nothing back then out there like there is today on consumer products and how to make a business. That did not exist back then. So I was like on dieline.com, like looking at people's packaging awards and trying to figure out how to do this. But fast forward 9 months later, it was like the day before Thanksgiving. We got our first store. And, we had, I don't know, it was like 150 boxes that they ordered because they thought it would be enough to go from Thanksgiving to Christmas. And we sold out of those in 3 hours, and we beat butter and milk sales that day. And that's when Whole Foods, really took off.
So you've had a partner in this journey. In 2015, Ross Perkins joined you. Can you tell us about his background and his role since then, up to date?
Yeah, obviously running a restaurant company and then also trying to launch a frozen food brand is challenging. And I knew it was going to be. I was still kind of in the middle of fundraising for the restaurant to get a full brick and mortar and not be in this, two-prong approach to trying to get food out there. So I knew I needed somebody who had some level of intellect on CPG, who was a business person. Because, the expectation was you were going to have to field the sales, the orders, and all that. And then on top of that, make biscuits. We were all covered in flour. Our keyboards were covered in flour, everything, because we were making them and selling them and, doing everything just the two of us. So when I brought him in, ironically enough, he had to close his business down. I met him at the commercial kitchen we were working at. He had a nut company back then. It was like a praline company. And all of a sudden one day he didn't have the pralines out. He was just had a clipboard. He was walking around the kitchen and I was like, what's going on here? And he was like, oh, well, I had to shut it down because I became allergic to nuts. So he couldn't do his own company anymore. So I was like, well, hey, are you looking for work? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, well, why don't you come to my 30th birthday and I can tell you about it. It's at this party right down the street at this firehouse place. And so he came over, he did the worm. He was breakdancing on the floor. And then on top of that, we were talking about, making biscuits, selling biscuits, doing all of it. And he said, yeah, I'm in. And that was it. So, I respect him because he's a hustler. He has, big five contracting experience. He came from KPMG. But then on top of that, he is a workhorse. And I always say, he's not my right-hand man. He's my second right hand. So it's been, you can't run a business without a good partner. And he's been that for me.
So in 2017, you launched your first brick and mortar drive-thru restaurant. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So in the midst of trying to fundraise for the restaurant and looking for a space, the challenge I still had was that the frozen business was growing. And every time we thought we got ahead and made some pallets that, we could store, some client would come through and take it. And we were like, oh man, so we could never get ahead. And I was like, we really need our own space to fill up a truck and get that out of there. And, DC it's a small city and there's not a lot of industrial space. So in looking for spaces, even where a truck could go, it was few and far between. And then I stumbled across a drive-thru restaurant. It was on its last legs and it was clearly like a failed Wendy's, I think it was in its heyday. And then somebody took it and made it a chicken and fish shack. Good God, the smells they're still in my nostrils. But it had a big parking lot and a huge turn radius in the front parking lot so that a truck could come in. So I bargained with the landlord and I said, can I take this space for now? We'll figure out if it's going to work long run because I didn't even have time for an inspection to see how bad it was. But, we were like, we'll take it with our own hands. We painted that thing, cleaned it out, put the equipment in less than 30 days because we needed to build up inventory. We dropped a big reefer trailer out in the parking lot and started building inventory out of that thing. So the drive-thru was critical because it was a space for us to grow the frozen brand. And at the same time, the unanticipated consequence was that we had no idea how many people really, really wanted chicken and biscuits in that neighborhood. When we opened the first day, people were sleeping in the parking lot. I just want to remind you, this is a very up and coming neighborhood, not safe to sleep in the parking lot. And people were. And when we opened our doors, it didn't stop. We went through an entire weekend's worth of food in about 4 hours. We were calling for emergency supplies from everywhere. The line was wrapped because it was a drive-through. The car line was all the way down to the Costco, which was about a mile and a half down the road. So it was insane. So again, thank God I had Ross, because he was holding down the fort trying to get biscuits made out the back while the chaos was happening in the front. And I'm running around finding chicken and, taking deliveries and kissing hands, kissing kids and shaking hands, all that stuff, because the mayor would come and I was like, what's happening? So it was quite the experience, but it was really, again, just proof that we had 100% the community behind us in growing the brand.
So I'm curious, given that your parents were in the restaurant business, I'm curious how they responded to your business, your startup.
Well, I mean, obviously no immigrant parent is proud of saying that their kid works at a restaurant. So, they never really got it. And to be completely frank, I mean, I didn't even get to quit my day job wait until later. So I was still working my full-time job, and they were like, why do you want to work in a restaurant? It's so hard, and just really, not happy with what they thought was a move backwards. But, I think it's a really important thing for people to understand that, people of color, people that are less fortunate in low income neighborhoods, people who are children of immigrants, as many times as you see these lawyers and doctors that get spun out of these stories, the hardest thing that they don't have is access to information, mentorship, and opportunity. And you know what? Maybe if I did know a doctor or a lawyer, I would have become one, but I didn't. So I had a really hard time wrapping my head around what that was. So wouldn't it be natural that as a kid, you want to be what your parents are, no matter what, because you're the only example that they have. So I think, in retrospect, at first they were obviously like, this is stupid. But at the end of the day, when they started seeing all the success, they understood what I was doing. And it was just that I was able to take what their little American dream was and just amplify it, 100-fold.
So let's go back to 2018. You started your second brick and mortar restaurant. Can you tell us about that? And how did that respond to COVID-19?
Yeah, it was supposed to be a secondary location, and unfortunately, like I told you, that drive-through was a bit of a slap job. So without an inspection, with as busy as the restaurant could get and all the use that was coming out of the property, it just obviously was not built for that level of traffic. It hadn't had a lot of renovations done, and at the end, we couldn't really come to terms with the landlord on making some accommodations to stay. So the second restaurant ended up becoming a pivot, and but it was great because it was a great landlord, a great setup. It was in a burgeoning neighborhood, Shaw in Washington, D.C., right by Howard University and Howard Hospital, right above the metro. I mean, it hit all the boxes. So we were really excited about opening up a formalized restaurant space separate from the food production, because right around that time too, we had solidified finding a co-packer. Because we finally had some crazy wins. We'd been growing about, I don't know, I think 2016 we were in about 100 stores, 2017, before we got the news that we got Publix and Kroger, we were in a couple hundred stores. So we went from a couple hundred to like 1,200 doors overnight. But that helps, co-manufacturers see the light and also want to work with us. So because we were able to formally start manufacturing in a separate space, it was the time to kind of separate the business. But then obviously COVID-19 happened, and everyone knows what it's done to the restaurant industry. I think, without students around, with, hospitals, even the workers of the hospitals couldn't leave the hospital, right? So just a lot of chaos and empty apartments in the neighborhood that really led to the restaurant needing to close. But while it was a sad chapter, at the end of the day, we had a restaurant for over 5 years, and we learned a lot. We have a POS full of data of what sold, and hopefully all those things become Mason Dixie products one day.
And in 2019, you were participated in the Chapati Incubator program. Can you describe what the program is and what impact it had on Mason Dixie?
Yeah, we actually applied for that incubator multiple times and gotten turned down. So I always tell people, just keep trying, right? But it was amazing because, one, Chapati is a phenomenal company. It truly does live up to all the standards that Hamdi, the founder, really wanted for people. And, I think part of it was philanthropic for them to, open up their doors to, smaller brands that needed help. I think the other side of it was the mission to create better food for more people the only way to do that is to support other people making good food for good people. So we learned a lot. I'd say the biggest attribute, people think it's because you get a bunch of money or something from it. You don't get money. It's the exposure that you get from working with the amazing people they can afford to hire, right? It's the exposure to seeing how a business that started off of the back of that man turned into a $5 billion company, right? What does a $5 billion company look like when it's not 150 years old? I mean, they were barely 15 years old doing that kind of money. So the exposure to seeing how a company can scale from the back office, understanding the types of people and how they organize themselves, how leadership is enabled, all of that was invaluable information. And that's really what I think helped us, weather the storm of COVID-19 efficiently, what helped us really scale the business to this day and all the new products that we're launching. It just really gave me the perspective that I needed as a leader and as a founder as well to take the company to the next level.
So walk us through really what happened in COVID-19 in terms of your restaurant and your operational.
Yeah, so obviously the restaurant, we kept it alive as long as we could, but July we ended up closing it. And honestly, it was already a bear to tackle. It was hard to know if staff could come into work that day. I mean, it was hard to know actually, one of the biggest problems we had was we couldn't get deliveries. We could not get, our food suppliers to deliver on time or at all. And there'd be times where you could see a truck coming and then all of a sudden he'd just disappear off the map and just wouldn't show up to the restaurant. So, it was difficult times. So, I feel for any restaurateur who's been able to weather the storm, know that they've got some true battle scars and they're true entrepreneurs that could handle that. But, we were also lucky in that we already had a frozen food business, and frozen food sales last year climbed, 30 plus points for the first time probably in history. So it was transformational for the frozen food business because the amount of trial that we got was incredible. I think people with having a lot more expendable income were trying new things, and they discovered us and loved us, fell in love. They're new amazing customers to this day. I want to say we had a 70% uptick in sales as a result, like permanent, as a result of consumer loyalty that we gained from COVID. So I think, while it was bittersweet, it was transformational for our business to continue growing, despite what was going on in the world.
And so when did you decide to pivot from a retail operation to manufacturing?
I don't think it was ever a formal pivot. I still had dreams that we were going to have 100 restaurants and this amazing national food company. I'm an entrepreneur. I think of crazy things all the time. But I think COVID-19 really squashed that idea, because to do a restaurant really, really well, to weather something like that, you have to be 100% focused solely on the restaurant business. And I think knowing what's gone on, even in the last 6 months in this industry, you've got to be dedicated with resources and, really be willing to change how restaurants are going to be run permanently. And in looking at that versus running this frozen food company that has been skyrocketing with, triple digit sales growth, it would be foolish of me to not dedicate my resources to something growing that rapidly. So I ended up making the decision to stay in frozen. I'll never say never. You never know. We may one day, go back to restaurants, and Stuart will be looking for restaurant space for me, and we'll be, honky dory. But for now, the focus is on frozen food.
So last year you closed on a $6.3 million Series A. Can you tell us about the process and some of the investors?
Yeah, so it was an interesting process being a woman of color selling biscuits in America to white straight male VCs. It's always an interesting paradigm, but it was fun. I learned a lot, and I think every entrepreneur who is raising capital needs to understand how venture capital works so you can decide if it's right for you. And the reality is, it's all financial. It has really nothing to do with mission-based investing, all these sell points, right? It's about money, and it's about how quickly it turns. So, in learning that by pitching after, I think I've pitched, 100 plus VCs, I realized that no matter how much I could get them on the hook to listen to me, no matter how much they truly did love the product, if you have the wrong profit profile. Even if you're going to be a profitable company, they're worried because you're not going to need another round, right? So there's like all these little nuances that people don't realize until they get into it. And when I started to realize it, I was like, all right, I'm fishing in the wrong pond, and I really need to find my people, and I need to find my people that believe in what I want to do and how we're going to do it, and also people that are going to help me do it, not just sit in an office somewhere and stare at sales data analytics about a category and tell me I'm doing it wrong, right? I want people that are going to be boots on the ground with me, elbows deep in flour or money, one of the two. But something. You got to be helping the entrepreneur somehow. And so I was very lucky to find a network of high wealth individuals, private investors that really got behind the brand and wanted to be a partner. And I think that's another important term to throw out when you're fundraising, right? Like, you got to find partners. It is literally the same thing as a marriage. You just don't have like domiciled relations with them, right? Like you share your assets with them, you share your wins and you share your losses. It's the same thing as marriage. So you got to know who you're marrying. And I think the only way to do that is if you have private investors, right? Because you get to know them as people and you get to work with them and you get to figure out if they're the right fit. And I found that time and time again. I go on walks with some of my investors every now and again. I have midnight calls when something's going wrong. They're always there for me. And I think it's really important that people stop, creating these malicious, iconologies of people with money. Some people really do have it, and what they're doing is just trying to change the world with the only thing that they have the power to do, and that's to give people money. So, I had very incredible relationships there, to the point too that, we're certified woman-owned business. And that was really hard to get. And any woman will tell you, right? Because as you grow and you need capital and your cap table changes, it's hard to maintain the balance that 51% is owned by women, right? Very few female investors out there. So I told one of my lead investors, I think it's really important that we keep up the status. What do you think we can do? Hoping that he had a network of magical, 100,000 women with money, right? And he was like, well, what if we just, what if our investors, I asked them if they would if their wives would invest. And I was like, oh, interesting concept, if they will, Every single guy went to their wives and every single wife said, well, yeah, I'd love to invest. And women are the best investors, the best marketers, man, because they'll be at the grocery store. They're not even buying Mason Dixie. They got eggs in the cart. They're like, oh my God, I invested in that brand. You need to buy Mason. And they like chase you down with the cart until you put it in your cart. So, not only are they amazing, investors, they're amazing sales and marketing people, right? So, I'm really lucky that all those women stood up and said, I want to do this. And I think it was also incredible because it's probably the first time ever they were asked by their husbands if they'd like to invest in something. And they all did. And who knows, I hope that they're investing in a ton of other stuff now because of the experience. But, it's also, again, it's important to create the partnerships you want with the values that you want, right? And don't succumb to the big ideas out there that VC is the only way to go, private equity. You can build a company and your partnerships the way you'd like to.
That's a lot of kittens to be herding. So you get great credit for doing a 6.3 Series A individual investors. You deserve important accolades on that. Can you give us a snapshot of where Mason Dixie is today in terms of stores, annual revenue, products, distribution partners outside of Whole Foods? Yeah, where are you today?
Yeah, we're in over 6,000 stores nationwide with 3 product lines and over 20 individual SKUs. So all in all, they're called points of distribution in this industry. So each product has its own point. So for the number of products in the market, it's about almost 17,000 points of distribution. So half of that came during COVID. So it was still a great time to be supplying our retail partners and launching new products. We're actually launching a new product into the market next month. We're very, very excited about in the frozen breakfast category. So that's something that we're really excited about because that, market opportunity is over $2 billion large just in that one product line alone. So, for us, we're headed in a very big direction. My goal is to make this $1 billion company, right? To really make this as large as possible and improve the way Americans are enjoying baked goods. It's time. Betty Crocker, Sara Lee, Little Debbie, they're from 1950. It's over. We gotta change that paradigm. And I think we're the company to do it.
And so what is the growth strategy? And is it internal or are there any acquisitions? Will you need some additional capital?
Yeah, in this industry, you always need capital. But, we're really lucky. We're a hair away from profitability, which is incredibly rare in an emerging brand in the frozen food space. So we're very excited about that. I'd like to keep it internal as long as possible. I joke that I am pretty much unhireable, mostly because I don't think anyone will want to work with this know-it-all entrepreneur ever again if I had to go back to corporate America. So, for me, this is everything. This is it. This is all of my savings. This is all of my youth. This is, all of my everything. And I want to see it through to the end, and whatever the end is, the end is. But, again, with the goal of being $1 billion company, there's no need in my mind for an acquisition target necessarily. I just want to grow this thing as big as possible first.
Well, just one final question. You reside at 300 West Pratt Street. So tell us about the building and the advantages of that, and how you chose it.
Well, Baltimore is the greatest city in America. I will fight somebody if they think differently. Obviously, I was born and raised here, but I did obviously start this company in DC, and I think one of the telltale signs that I thought it was the right time to move was not having a craft community, right, of normal people that want to eat normal food made by awesome people. And I think there's no other city in America like Baltimore that could get behind a brand the way the city does. And so I wanted to be closer to home. I wanted to be closer to the story of, why I started this and how I started this. And I wanted to be around people that believed in me. I mean, I have kindergarten friends that when I told them I moved back, they were like, oh my God, so excited. I ran into one. This is what I love about this. I ran into a high school friend at the O's game last week. And, that stuff didn't happen to me in DC. And this is what I was really looking for. And ironically enough, I was also looking for a spot close to the lovely amenities of Camden Yards and M&T Stadium. And because I want to be able to have our team have fun, right? Go right outside and go enjoy a game. Go right outside and jump on the light rail somewhere, right? Like the convenience of this location at 300 West Pratt was literally idyllic. It was also really great too, because as a startup, you start small. You don't need at least 10,000 square feet of space. And honestly, in the DC market, it was really hard to find landlords willing to subdivide because they were, there's so much turnover in that market. It was hard. So they didn't want to do it. They were out of funds or whatever the excuses were. So it was nice to come to a city where the landlords are still very attached to ownership and want to see, things change. This property specifically had great space sizing for startups. And then on top of that, being in the middle of everything, I'm across from the convention center, like I said, across from Camden Yards. We're right in the heart of the city, right off of 95. I mean, you could not ask for a better space. So much so that I think we're going to stay here and extend it. I think we're looking to take this wall behind me down and keep going backwards. We got more people coming through. So, I'm very excited. I'm really happy about the choice we made here.
So I never say that I love certain types of interviews, but I will tell you, having done 500 interviews, my favorites are always foodpreneurs, and you were a classic. The founder of La Colombe and Natalie Stress, Tessamy was fun because every third word was profanity, and his lawyer was with it. So, every...
Look, I toned it down for you, Edwin, because I didn't know the audience here, but if you meet me in person...
You had one three-letter word, but it's all right, it was perfect. So I just realized that, the least interesting are cybersecurity, but foodpreneurs, I love your story. It's a great story. And I hate to use the word grit or resilience, but I love to see your pivoting and you've raised that bounce for me. I just love your story. So we wish you the best of luck. You keep us surprised as you when you decide to buy 300 West Pratt.
There we go.
We don't have McCormick's downtown anymore. We need.
There you go.
We need a food brand on the outside of a building. So
I agree. We'll get there.
I've enjoyed the interview, and we wish you the best of luck. It's a great story, and
thank you so much.
I'm sure your parents are very, very proud of you.
They'll never tell me. They're hard up Asian parents, but they are. Thank you guys. Thanks for the time.